So one of the hottest areas right now for web designers and developers is responsive web design. A while back I did a tutorial showing how to create a separate mobile website where you have a completely different site for when people are on mobile devices. Well, with responsive design, you have a single site that gracefully adapts itself to different screen widths, and that uses CSS media queries. Well, our brand new responsive design tool called Reflow is available in preview release form right now. So you're going to need to go to the Creative Cloud website, creative.adobe.com. Now, if you either don't have an account yet or you're not signed in, you're going to want to take care of that. So signing up for the free Creative Cloud account, obviously, is free, but it lets you access trial versions and also preview release versions of our software. So you definitely want to do that. So then you want to go to Apps. This is where you can download all of your applications. And if I scroll down under Edge, Tools, and Services, you can see the Reflow preview. And just go ahead and download and install that. Now I'm also going to be showing you the integration with Edge Inspect. So if you haven't used Inspect before, download that as well, because this will allow you directly from Reflow to see how your site actually looks on a whole range of mobile devices, essentially, however many you have connected that Inspect can talk to. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the tutorial files that I gave you, and it contains a bunch of graphics and also a PSD file. So let's look at that PSD. So essentially, as a designer, I've mocked up a new San Francisco Giants website. And essentially what it's going to be is a fixed width site, which is 850 pixels wide. But then obviously I need to be able to adapt that as the screen width goes down. Now I've already extracted all of the images that we're going to use and put them in the tutorial files, but I also included the PSD just if you want to see it. So obviously all of these images are just from Google Images, and that's where I got those from. So now let's actually go into Reflow. So again, just a disclaimer right off the top. This is just the first preview release of this tool. So, it's not a complete tool. It's going to, things are going to be changing. And also you're going to see some bugs in here, and you'll probably see some in this tutorial. Again, the main thing here is to start using it to get feedback about, directions to take the tool, and also if you find any bugs. So really quickly, the interface. Now, obviously, in this tool, it's all about CSS manipulation. So here we have two different tabs. First is Layout, and this allows us to set CSS properties that are about layout. So size, margin, padding, how they float. And under Styling, this is where we add colors, gradients, images, borders, radiuses, drop shadows, things like that. So we have these two different tabs, and we're going to be going through a lot of these properties in this tutorial. Down here at the bottom, we can see we have this little button. It's called the Elements panel, but you can really think of this as the DOM representation of your design. So we can see here currently we have our main body, and then we already have a container, which is a div. So by default, Reflow will create this container div for you. And inside of this is where you're going to put all of your design assets and HTML stuff. And you can also see by default it's set to be a percentage-based website at 90%. So we're going to actually be changing that a little. Over on the right here we have an Align panel, typical Align panel when you select multiple things. We can also adjust the zoom. We can here connect to Edge Inspect, and we'll be doing that later again, so we can actually preview our designs across actual devices simultaneously. And here is the area that's really important. This is where you're going to be setting your breakpoints or media queries. So you can see we have this little scrubber right here, and this is going to allow us to change the width of essentially the screen. So you can see right now I'm on a 720p resolution here, but you can see as I can mimic a 600 pixel wide device, go down to 320, things like that. And when I'm at these different points, if my design starts breaking down, I'm going to click Add to add this breakpoint. And now I'm going to actually be starting to add or to change the CSS for the things inside of here so that they actually, look nice on this screen width. And I might even want to remove some stuff depending on what I'm actually building. So let me just get rid of this. And let's go back out to our default. So remember, like I said, in our website, which is actually a very common use case, we have a fixed width of 850 pixels. If it gets smaller than that, then we want to start adjusting things. So we don't want it to always be 90% of the browser. If somebody has a cinema display, I don't want it to go 90% of their browser. So I want to keep it a fixed width. So this container, what I want to do is to change it from a percentage to 850 pixels, like that. And again, this is the viewable area now for our container. So now I want to start styling it. So first, let's start with the background. So I can click here in this open area, and now have the background selected, and I can change the color to black, which is the color that we want for this particular design. Now inside of here, I can also add images and gradient layers, so I can build up multiple layers of backgrounds here. We're not just limited to colors. We can actually, create all kinds of complex backgrounds. Now, what I want to do is I want to save this now. So I'm going to say File, Save, and I'm going to go into the Assets folder and create a new folder called Giants. And then I'm going to rename this project to Giants. Now, here's a really important thing to take note of, is currently you can't import or open any existing HTML or CSS content. Currently, it's just you're starting your design from scratch here in Reflow. So just be aware of that. If you're looking to open up your site and edit your existing media queries, Reflow is not at that point yet. Again, it's targeted at mainly designers. If you're already a media query expert, you still might find this tool really useful, like I do, just especially for prototyping, to really quickly mock up the responsive design, and then I'm going to go, of course, tweak it in my code editor. And the other thing to mention is you can't edit the code inside of here. We can look at the CSS code for, let's say, the background, or if I select my container, we can look at the CSS. We can also copy the CSS to the clipboard, but we can't edit the code, really. Okay, so the first element I want to add is our logo. So I'm going to go to this image button. It's going to allow me to import a logo. And I want to click Open. Now when I click Open, now I have my hand off the mouse. Now I can actually drag this thing around and place it where I want it to be. So I don't want it to have any left margin, and I want it to have a top margin of 50 pixels. So again, I can either just get it the way I want, just dragging it around, or I can come in and just change the numbers. And that's really going to depend on how much CSS the person who's using the tool knows. If they don't know what a top margin is going to do, then obviously they're not going to be able to come in here and directly start using this. But this is actually a great tool to teach you all of this CSS stuff. So that's pretty cool. So we can see by default, it's actually floated it to the left. And again, I can look at the actual CSS here. So float left, all of that looks good. Now I want to bring in my navigation. Now let's go back to the PSD. So this navigation right here is actual live text here in Photoshop. But when I put this in HTML, I'm going to want this to be an unordered list with a bunch of list item elements. And I'm going to style it and all of that. And I don't ever want this navigation to shrink or to, I always want it to be this width. So in this case, I'm actually just bringing it in as an image. Because again, that's going to, I have no way of creating UL elements or list items inside of here. So I'm going to bring it in as an image. So I'm going to go to double click nav, and you can see now it's allowing me to position it up. And at this point, again, I'm just going to drop it approximately there. Now the margin top is going to be different, obviously, because of the different heights. But you can see it's floating it to the left, which is not what I want. I want to float to the right so that it sticks to the right-hand side, and I want to drag it all the way to the right, like that. And again, we're just going to worry about approximates here. So remember that our container, we've now changed it to be a fixed width of 850 pixels. But that's quickly going to break down. If I start moving this in, boom, my nav is already starting to be cut off. So what I want to do is to set a breakpoint now to change it from fixed width to actually be a percentage-based width. So I'm going to click this plus sign, and this now creates a media query for me. Now if you hold down on this arrow, it will allow you to switch between the orientation between maximum and minimum. We're going to stick with maximum, and you can also add a label for the media query if you want, just to help you recognize it. But I'm going to set this one at 930. So if the screen the user is on is 930 or less, then I want to change it to a percent-based layout. And I want to change it to a 90% layout. So you can see when I drag, and inside of here with the resolution I have, you can't actually even see what that's going to look like. But essentially, this is where it will turn into percentage-based. So now about that, how do we actually see what we've done? So what I'm going to do is go to View, make sure we've saved, and go Preview in Chrome. And this launches up Google Chrome. So now you can see as I minimize or as I close in the width, it's a fixed width site here. You can see it's still 850 pixels. But when I hit that breakpoint, now it's actually percentage based, and now the nav is sticking to the right, and you can see I'm going to have a problem there, and we'll deal with that. But that's how you actually preview your content. Okay, so now let's go back to the default, which is essentially the CSS that we want for when none of these media queries apply. And I'm going to import another image, and this is going to be our banner. So for the banner, I'm going to put it, and I'm going to give it a top margin of 40 pixels. We're going to set the width to 100%, like that. And now we have our banner image, which is spanning all the way across. Now, with the way images are handled inside of Reflow, they're already brought in a way that they're going to scale nicely. So as I start scaling this, we can see it's already working the way that it should. And that's because the size has been set to auto. I change it to 100% because that's the way I like to see my CSS. They use max width actually for that. But here's my image. And one of the things you want to do is you want to frequently test because you want to make sure, especially since this is a preview release, that things are working the way they should. So now you can see that's working nicely. That banner image is scaling with the nav. Okay, so let's go back. And now we, again, want to keep working on this. Again, we want to go back to our default, not to be in the actual media query. And now we want to add those 3 news items. So let me show you in the Photoshop file. We have these 3 little news items. And essentially, these are going to be divs that are going to be floated left from one another. We're not going to worry about this text here. We're not going to worry about styling it, really, because we can't add things like links and stuff in Reflow. But I am just going to come in here to my Layers panel, and I'm just going to copy this text to the clipboard, and we'll use that over in Reflow. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create my 3 divs that are going to contain those news items. So all I'm going to do is to quickly drag out a box here. And again, with the box tool, you can think of it just as a div tool if that helps you. And now I want to have no left margin, and I want to have a top margin of 40 pixels. And now all I'm going to do is to duplicate this item. I'm going to hit Command or Control D, and now I've duplicated it. And again, I want to set it at, we'll just worry about the top margin right now. I want to set it at 40 pixels, drop it down. I'm going to add another one. Again, set the top margin at 40 pixels. Okay, so we have these three divs, and they're already set automatically to float left, like that. Now what we want to do is to set the actual width of these items, and we're going to be using percentage-based width. So we're going to want each of these to be 30% wide. So let me change these. Now you can actually select multiple items inside of here and change properties, but I've noticed a couple of bugs with that. So now this is wrapped to down below is because there's too much margin here. This margin should be 5% like that, and the same with this. And then that's going to equal out to be 100%. So now I have these three divs that are automatically scaling the way that they should. So now what I want to do is to fill them in. So I'm going to go to the Image tool. I'm going to get Tim Lincecum here. And you'll notice that as I drag over these divs, when they highlight, that means that when I drop it, it's actually going to be placed inside of this container. So here I'm just going to drop it in anywhere. It's now inside of this container. Now if you're ever questioning that, you can always look at my Elements panel here. You can see the image is inside of that box. So when it brings the images in, it's already, like I mentioned, set to the size of auto, max width 100%. So all we want to do is just to wipe out all these margin values. So we can come inside of here, just say 0 pixels. So let's do the same thing for the other two news stories. So let's get Hunter Pence. We'll place them in here, and we'll just wipe out those margin values. And we'll do one more, and that is Panda Pablo. Now here's where I told you about you're going to find some bugs. Here's one. I could never get this one to fall into this div correctly. So all I'm doing is actually just moving it to the left a little bit and then adding this item, and then I can take this container and move it back to where it was. So that's one bug that I've noticed so far. Again, preview release. I'll say it again. Okay, so we have our three items here now. And you can see these images are scaling down nicely the way that they should. So now let's deal with the text. So now I'm going to grab the text tool, and again, just drop it in there. It doesn't really matter. We're going to adjust the size. And I'm going to paste in what I have on the clipboard. So now firstly, let's change the actual style of the text. So obviously I want this to be white text. Now for typefaces, you can choose from the browser defaults like the ones we've always used. But we also have Adobe Edge fonts built inside of here. Again, these are free to use with a free Creative Cloud account. So you can browse the fonts you want, find one you like, select it, and then it's going to be available for you to use directly here inside of Reflow. So I'm not going to worry about that. I am going to come into this text here. Let me deselect here, and let me just put in my line break there, where it should be. Okay, now I want to adjust the layout properties of this. So essentially, real quick, just wipe out all the margins. I want this to be 100% wide, so it fills that div. And now we can come back and look, and we can say, okay, so I want a 20 pixel top margin, like that. Now you'll see that the text is extending outside of the div. And it's because this div has a height associated with it. We don't want that. We want it to be set to auto. That way it's automatically going to adjust itself to its contents. So now I'm going to select this. I'm going to duplicate it and paste it inside of this Hunter Pence story. And again, we need to go through those same things. I'm quickly going to set the margins to 0. Let's give a top margin of 20 pixels. Then we want to go into the actual box itself and set its height to auto. Well, here we're going to run into that same bug that I noticed, so I'm just going to move it over a little bit once again. And let's duplicate it, I'm going to put it in the Panda story. And again, I'm going to, let me move it over to 5% margin where it should be. And now we'll work on this text. So let's just zero it out. Then I'm going to say 20 pixels. Like that. And then we need to go into the container and again, just set the height to auto. Okay, so this is looking good. So let's go ahead and actually preview it. So preview in Chrome. And here's the site. And you can see when I start going down, boom, it's now changed into a percentage-based site. Everything is scaling nicely the way that it should. Here you'll notice this is our next problem or our next breakpoint that we need to deal with. The nav collapses into the logo. So let's deal with that case right now. So let's scroll up and we're going to scroll it down until just before that nav collides with the logo. And let's add another breakpoint. Okay, so now at this point, now we want to change a few different things about each of these items. So first of all, for the logo, we no longer want to float left. We want to actually center it. So we're going to set margins to auto for the left and the right, and then still keep the top margin of 50 pixels. Now, one bug that I've kind of found is what you see displayed inside of here is not always correct or accurate. So just be aware of that. Now, the next thing we need to do is to also, for the nav, do the same thing. We don't want to float this right. We actually want to center it, set margin equal to auto for the left and the right. But you can see it's put in these values here that I don't want. I actually want a top margin of 20 pixels, like that. So now we have our nav fixed. So now I want to do one more thing, and that is when we get down to a certain width here, you can see those news items, they get really like skinny. So at a certain point, I'm going to want to actually break those onto their own lines, essentially, so they take up the full width. So again, I'll come here and I'll add a new media query. And I want to highlight another thing just to be aware of. When we select an item, we can see that some of these fields are highlighted and they're color-coded to the media query where those properties have been set. Now this is pretty important because you want to make sure that things are still working the way they were before you added a new media query. So definitely check that out. Here you can see where this has actually been set, and you can always look in the CSS box as well to see that information. So now I want to set these on their own lines. So first of all, I want to make sure that this image, we need to make sure that it has a clear fix on it. So I'm going to say clear both. And actually, that was set to clear none here for some reason in 676. So I can actually go back here. And yeah, I want to say clear both for that. So the next thing I want to do is for this news story is, again, I want to set the margins to auto so that it spans all the way across. I want it to be a width of 100%, like that. And I want to have a top margin of 40 pixels, like that. Now, another thing I want to do is to take this image, which is inside of here, and I want to make sure it's centered in the news story, like this. So now I want to do the same thing with the other ones, and I'm just going to select them from the Elements panel. So again, I'm going to set margins to auto. For this, we want a top margin of 40 pixels. Whoops. And that shouldn't be negative. And again, we want to make it 100% width. And lastly, we'll do the last news story. Again, margins auto. We want 40 pixels for the top width and 100%, like that. So you can see what's happening. So now when we get to that certain width, we're now essentially making our stories on their own line. And I need to just center these images as well really quickly. And you can see here that I'm still not getting the margin that I want. So let's look at why that might be. So this is where we can actually look at the CSS code. So we want to, for this one, we're going to set clear both. And then let's make sure our CSS is actually being set correctly. So we want a margin top, we want auto, so that's actually correct. So that should work. Let's look here at this image. We'll look at the CSS. And it's clear both, float left. So let's double check this one again. Come here. And yeah, this should work. Now here's where, again, you might want to go into the developer tools. So at this point, I'm going to actually preview it in Chrome and then actually manually go down, because you want to make sure that the error is not in the fact that it's a preview release. So if I look here, we can see this image should have had that clear both applied, which it does. This one has it. It has the margin top. So that looks right. We can play around with these different things. Yeah, that shouldn't matter. That's correct. So I'm probably missing something simple, but anyway, we can go back and continue tweaking this. I can add a margin bottom to this as a last resort, and it will get that effect. Although with the clear fixes applied, it should work. But that could be just my mistake as well. So anyway, so now we have these 3 breakpoints that are nicely changing to adjust our content to different screen sizes. So that's awesome. So now let's actually look at how we preview this on mobile devices, because one of the things about Chrome is you can't minimize it more than 400 pixels or approximately. So you can't even test if you have a media query at 320. So that's where inspect comes into play. So I already have inspect running. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to use Edge Inspect, but I'm just going to turn it on. And I already have my Samsung device actually running. So now at this point, to see it, I actually have A-Shot, which is a program that streams your Android phone to your computer. And you can see here it's that site running nicely on my Galaxy S3. And I can scroll around, make sure everything is looking the way that it should, and everything looks good. So again, the idea with the integration with Inspect is I can have my iPad, iPhone, Android phones, Kindles, all of these things open on my desk. And as soon as I click that button inside of Reflow, it's going to go out to all those devices, and I'm going to be able to actually see immediately how they look on device. So that's a really, really cool thing. So again, this is an overview of the preview release for Reflow, and this tool is only going to get better. So definitely in the comments, if you have suggestions, comments, if you find bugs, definitely go ahead and leave comments for it. So yeah, so keep watching out for future updates for this tool, and it'll make responsive design, especially for designers, much easier.